All right, it looks like all of our folks that were waiting have joined. I will continue to admit folks as they tune in. A couple of announcements as guests are getting tuned in. First, I want to just make sure you know this session is being recorded. So if you miss any of the session, we will be uploading it back into the Whova app within the next 2 weeks. If you have any questions for the panelists today, go ahead and enter them right into the Zoom chat. Our moderators will be looking there for any questions, and we ask you to kindly leave your microphones and cameras off unless directed to do otherwise by our presenters. And it looks like we're ready to get started. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to our presenter, Noah, to kick things off.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thanks everyone for coming today. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Noah Harmon. I am the National SAFE President. We have a great board of professionals here that's willing to talk to us today, so it's a great opportunity for students. Just a quick plan for the session. We're gonna get started. Everyone on the panel is gonna give us 5 to 10 minutes on a little bit of career history, what sort of jobs they've held, education, any advice they might have for students in our position. Any questions you had, like we said, you can put those in the chat. Those of you that are in classrooms with multiple people, if you could just kind of designate someone to stand near the computer and enter questions in the chat at the end, that would be great. We'll hold the majority of our questions until that end question period, where you can ask anything you want or just interact with our panel here. With that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Zach. He's our moderator for the day, as well as a panel member. So thanks everyone for coming, and hope you're able to learn a lot.
Well, thank you, Noah, very much for setting this up. And I really want to thank the fellow panelists, because we've got a lot of years of experience and a lot of diversity of how we all got here. Just between me and Steve Miller, we have 2,000 years of experience. That's 1,900 of that's on Steve. So we get asked this question a lot when we're teaching or when we meet people on the fire line. I worked a lot with the University of Idaho SAFE chapter years ago when they came down to the Disney Wilderness Preserve, and the questions just, hey, how'd you get here? And all of a sudden we're in these positions to tell our tales. And the cool thing is, it is all different paths, and that's what I think is the strength of fire, because it speaks to a diversity of experiences. 25 years on horseback, that that explains a lot, Steve. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go around. Each of the panel will spend about 5 to 10 minutes talking about their career path, and at the end, we'll get into some good dialogue. Any question is fair game for us. We have heard them all probably, and so we look forward to really helping you. And just as a quick side note, this is sort of what this is what I consider us all sort of paying it forward, because people did this to us when we were in your shoes. And so and you don't often get a chance to talk to people and ask them about this stuff. So with that, we're going to start off with Adam. And hey, Adam, I see you. And so take it away, Adam. Oh, and just say your name, who you work for, and just, start off that way and then launch into it.
Okay, great. Yeah, and sorry earlier if I caused any anxiety with a slow connection. I'm on Zoom via hotspot, so I'm porting in from my phone. The only piece of career advice I'd say is never trust a cell connection. So we'll see how long I last. So I am currently with the U.S. Forest Service Pacific Northwest Research Station, and I have been working for the Forest Service since about June. So I'm a newcomer to the agency, but I've been around SAFE and AFE for a long time. I kind of rediscovered fire via SAFE and discovered a wonderful, so far extremely fulfilling career in fire through people like Zach, who was my S-130, S-190 instructor way back in 1912, I think it was. So yeah, thank you, Zach. And like Zach mentioned, I've experience, and I can relate a lot of stories of connections that are still active in AFE that helped me come up through what feels like kind of my recent career. Zach, is it now when we give our 5 to 10 minutes? Should I go on the long spiel?
You got it. Yes.
Okay, so I've got kind of maybe two versions of my story. I'll tell the less interesting one first to keep you in suspense. So I grew up in the Southeast. I'm a Mississippian, and I was around fire in the woods. That kind of instilled an early interest. I sort of got distracted by science, led back through kind of a longer, more interesting story that I'll get to next, to a PhD at the University of Florida, studying fire ecology, focusing particularly on landscape ecology, wetlands. And then I got a research job in Reno, the place called the Desert Research Institute, where I was for 8 years, worked a lot with atmospheric science, chemistry, and unmanned aircraft systems. And so now my career path leads me to Washington and the PNW. And so I am, I've got to the point where I'm now a team leader of a group of fire ecologists, many of whose names you've seen on publications for years. Roger Ottmar is on the FARA team, Susan Pritchard, Ernesto Alvarado. So it's incredibly rewarding to get to work with people of that caliber. Morris Johnson, and the air fire team. So it's really interesting. Okay, now speaking of interesting, the more sordid details of my past, I'd say, having grown up, let's see, I had one grandfather who was a timber cruiser, another grandfather who was a fire chief. And growing up in the rural Southeast, there wasn't a lot to do except for study fire. So my early work involved experiments in fire behavior with the gasoline cans stolen out of the tool shed. So you burn off enough eyebrows that eventually your grandpa ignites you or invites you onto a prescribed burn. So my first burn was when I was about 8, using a pine bow as a swatter, and then I forgot about fire for a while. I thought I wanted to do some other kind of science in college. It wasn't until late in my undergraduate career that somebody came up to Atlanta, where I was in school at Emory, and talked about prescribed fire. It might have been someone from Tall Timbers. And I learned this term, fire ecology, fire science. And I thought, holy cow, there are actually people that do this for a living. And so I felt like I embarked on a years-long path to discover what that was and get into it. But I've always been distracted by what is interesting and what seems useful and fun. So along the way, my career path, sure, you could draw a straight line along some of the points and design a line that looked like it was headed for a career in fire science. However, I've been an alligator biologist for a bit. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa, and I've done, and I managed a UAS program at University of Florida for a little while. So I took what might seem like a lot of diversions along the way that have really enriched the path. I would never advise someone to take the direct path that I took. You can't design that. And I think maybe one of the insights that I gain is that I didn't have anybody to model my career path on. I really sought out help and advice wherever I could get it. And I got a lot, but there wasn't often a very well-defined goal. As I once told a potential graduate advisor, I'm not sure what I want to do when I grow up. And I was 20 something when I said that. And my graduate advisor, who was in his 50s, said, well, I'm not sure either. And I think most of the most interesting people that I know aren't sure. So I don't want to make light of the hard work that you have to put into, finding a really good niche in science, fire science in this case. But there is so much serendipity and so much chance and help that goes into getting you into the right spot. And so I think maybe to kind of wind things up, if there is any kind of useful thing that I can summarize, it's knowing really good people who can see what you're doing and see places for you to do good work and who can help you get there. So that's what has helped me out the most. And I feel like now, in the spirit of paying it forward, like Zach says, that's what I feel like I can help to do now in my career.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. You hit on so many really good points. Next up is Camille.
Hi, everyone. I am an assistant professor at Colorado State University here in Fort Collins, Colorado, which is the native homelands of the Arapaho, Ute, and Cheyenne peoples. And I also have somewhat of a varied past, but also if you connect it from certain lines, it seems very linear, similar to Adam. I went to 11 schools in 12 years growing up, all over predominantly the southwestern US, as well as other countries, as my parents worked for aid organizations. And I did my undergrad at Brandeis University, which is a small university in the Northeast, basically to get as far away from my very large extended family as possible, going very far from the Southwest. I didn't stay there longer than 4 years because all I really wanted to do was be out in the woods in the Western US. And so I got a job with the Forest Service, originally on a wildlife crew. And then while I was still in college, and then moved on to a hotshot crew after that for a number of years, and really just wanted to cut down trees and dig line and not have to think about academics for a very long time. But turns out you can't turn off your brain very well. And there's a lot of really interesting things when you sit outside in the woods for 16 hours a day, as many of you probably are aware. And so I really got excited about thinking about how our ecosystems are changing when we have these big fires. And so that's what kind of ultimately led me to my master's at Northern Arizona University. And then after a couple more breaks to be a ski bum, I got my PhD at the University of Idaho before coming here to Colorado State. And I think Adam touched on a lot of like really great advice, and I agree. I have no idea what I want to do when I grow up, and I think the worst question to be asked in a job interview for me is like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Because usually my answer is sitting in a hot spring somewhere, not anything having to do with fire or academia. But yeah, I mean, I think I have enjoyed being an academic. Obviously, I'm still here, predominantly because I transferred in some ways one seasonal job for another, and there's lots of changes and constant new aspects of my job, right? Interacting with all the students that I get to interact with, having the opportunity to really dive deep into certain subjects that really interest me. It's kind of a fun way to engage a lot of my different interests, I think, and it's definitely not boring. Or, the boring parts, hopefully I keep to a minimum. And yeah, so I've been here at Colorado State for 5 years. I can't believe it's been that long. And I also work closely with the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute, which for me is a really important part of my job because I get the opportunity to do a lot of the more applied work and interaction with managers and stakeholders and things like that. That's a really important part for me. I don't want to just do science in a bubble, as cool as that is sometimes, but I really like to think about how my work can inform and help others. So did I cover everything we were looking for?
Yeah, that's really cool, Camille. Much thanks. Steve Miller, you are up next.
Cool. Thanks, Zach. My name is Steve Miller, and I serve the Forest Service as the Director for Fire and Aviation Management in the Eastern region. And I've sort of come full circle. So if Adam and Camille talked about straight lines, mine is anything but. I grew up here in the Midwest, just barely into Wisconsin. And apparently from my parents tell me that from the 3rd grade on, it was clear I was going to study forestry. And sort of like Camille, I could go to the University of Minnesota, which was right by my house, or I could go a couple hours away to Stevens Point. So I went to the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point for my bachelor's degree, had a great time in college, and spent my summers trying to get as much experience in the field as I could. And when I got out, I bounced around from temporary jobs for a while, eventually found my way onto the forest inventory and analysis crew for the Forest Service. We were in Texas. And it was fun, but you move every 30 days. And I had just gotten married and that wasn't going to work very long. So we were interacting with the Texas Forest Service on a regular basis. And while I was there, they offered me a job, and that's where I got introduced to fire. And wow, once I got introduced, I needed to have more of it. And Zach can attest to that. Anyway, so and then I ended up transferring over to the Florida Division of Forestry and worked my way through that system. But one of the things that I think is really important to my career was that I found a mentor who happened to be my boss's boss when I was in Bradenton. And he apparently could see something in me that was worthwhile. And so he would give me these phone calls with assignments. And it was always a good news, bad news joke. The good news is it was going to be a great assignment that was going to help me grow my career. The bad news is it was always this far outside my comfort zone. It was beyond what I thought was my capability. But if he called, I went. And I think that helped a lot. And it helped me get more comfortable in those uncomfortable environments we in fire get to work in. And then my mom visits at Thanksgiving and says, hey, there's this job in the newspaper you should apply for. And, you know, when moms are telling you that, you can say, no, I'm happy with the job I got a couple of times, but pretty soon you're going to do what she says. And that's how I got a job over at the St. Johns River Water Management District. And it was in its infancy as far as land management. And so it was pretty uncomfortable because there weren't established procedures. We had 2 drip torches and access to those horses that George is talking about in the chat room. But we did have a lot of partners. We had a lot of neighbors that were established programs. And so we quickly learned that the best way to build something is look at how somebody else built it, and not necessarily build it the same way they did, but at least grab the really good ideas and incorporate them. And so over the course of 26 years, we built a land management program that was pretty heavily invested in fire, pretty heavily invested in invasive plant management, because in Florida, that's goes kind of hand in hand with land management. And it was neat because all of us did everything, meaning there weren't fire people and recreation people. There were land management people. We worked really closely with our partners and did training and stuff. And I know that there were lots of times my wife is upset because I was giving the time I'm supposed to spend with her to somebody else by volunteering for something like the Prescribed Fire Council or being on incident management teams. But it was important to, I couldn't have forecasted where I was going to be, but looking back, I can see what each step enabled me to do next. And so I can see the building blocks of my life, my career in arrears, and what I gained from each place I had been. And then in 2018, the Florida pension system is punitive if you stay after 30 years. And I was at 31. And so I was looking around for what do I want to do next? I had the opportunity to bring my wife back to where she'd be nearby her mom. I had the chance to get a fire job with the Forest Service, in which my daughter works for the Association of State Foresters in the same region I work. So there's no conflict, but we get to work together 6 or 8 days a year. And so, wow, what a cool opportunity. And at that point, this region was just about tripling its expectations towards prescribed fire and fuels management on the landscape. And so it isn't quite the same as being there when we built the program at the St. John's, but it certainly was similar in that we were going to have to build something bigger than what we had in order to do that. So for the last little over 3 years, I've been working here at the Forest Service. I miss those days on the drip torch, but I have gotten out at least on 2 prescribed burns since coming up here. And what was funny is, to me, drip torches and hand tools and engines and even burning off a horseback is sort of natural. But people were surprised that a regional fire director knows how to use a hand tool or grab a drip torch. And I guess it was surprising and a little disappointing. But at any rate, we've gotten past that. They get that that's my preferred location. So anyway, key points: take those opportunities, even if they invest some of the time you'd rather spend some other way. Along the way, I did go back and get my master's degree, which was fun because while I was in there, they thought I had all the answers to the questions. There are other students in the class who were, I was doing that at 50. Anyway, and so they'd ask me, what do I know for sure about ecological restoration? And I said, mostly what I know is what you should never do because I did it and it didn't work. I got a couple of good ideas about things that might work again, but the things I know are things you shouldn't do. Anyway, with that, and instead of pay it forward, I refer to it as Steve's parade theory of life, which is in the early parts of our career, we learn from the parade that's in front of us. And in the latter parts of our career, we shift resources to sharing with those who are in the parade behind us. That's it, Zach. Thanks.
Cool. Awesome, Steve. Thanks. And so I'm up next. And so my name is Zachary Prusak, currently one of the wildland fire training specialists at Tall Timbers. Been there for about 5 months. But before that, the Nature Conservancy for 16 years as a Florida fire manager. Before that, Brevard County Environmentally Endangered Lands Program as one of their only fire folks at the time. Before that, the government of Walt Disney World, Reedy Creek Improvement District, sampling mosquito populations and lighting fire on Disney property. I think the first and only person that has done that because they actually have conservation lands. Before that, the Florida Park Service. And that's where that all started. Is I went to University of Central Florida. I studied ants. I was going to be the next E.O. Wilson. I had a passion for bugs and ants, and that just was driving me. And so my first real job was through a connection from a big goofy guy named Walt Thompson. So some of you might know, to echo everyone's sentiments, there are people that impact your life and you really don't know it at the time. But it is the cliche, who you know. Someone says, hey, here's a job opening, you can apply. So I went to the Park Service to be a biologist. And he said, hey, let's go on a fire. Like, okay, sure. And I had read about it at, an ecology class, and sure. And then same like what Steve said, blew me away. The idea that I can actually be a part of some important ecological process and do it. Meanwhile, that first fire, I lit my pants on fire. I had embers go into the we had a type 7 truck. It was an awful day, but I was hooked. But I never gave up that idea that I could still study insects and I could still do other things, but I never said no to opportunities. And so all through college, it was, do you want to do a manatee necropsy, a shark study, whatever. I took on things that were outside my own comfort zone just because, I like to be distracted. And so that was really cool to do. And I found in this fire realm, it's the same kind of thing. I didn't plan to get where I am right now at all. So Camille, to your point, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I got no clue, which is like I know locally or today, high schools ask the students, freshmen, what do you want to do? It's like, you've got to be kidding me. I now am leaning more toward training and outreach and talking to people, which if you told me I'd be doing that when I was younger, I would have said you're crazy, because I'd never liked to talk to people. I was shy, I stuttered, it was awful. But all along this way, I took on things. I just said, sure, let me try it. And I failed lots of times, but I also succeeded lots of times. And It really is this community of people and mentors. Rosie Mulholland, Walt and Steve, yourself, and other people that I've known through the years that form this cool fire community. And yeah, the recommendations I can make to you, that's the same thing. Just build up a network of people, and don't say no unless someone says, "Hey, can you do heart surgery?" You might want to say no. You might need some schooling on that, or maybe air traffic controller. Yeah, shy. No, I was awful, man. I stuttered and no, I did not want to talk to people. But here I am, and it's really cool because your career is not a straight line. Your career is like this, it just goes everywhere, and that's cool. And that's, I think, one of the great things about fire. All of us with our backgrounds contribute to something larger. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell. The next is, I guess Dana's not here, so Eric, you're up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Knapp. I'm a research ecologist with the U.S. Forest Service Pacific Southwest Research Station. I'm based in California. I've been in just this job for 17 years now, which is kind of shocking. I never thought I would stay in a job for 17 years. But this is a fascinating job. I mean, I've never been bored in 17 years, and there's just so much freedom to do stuff. These kind of jobs don't come open very often. But when they do, a federal research job is a good place to be. But like a lot of other people on this panel, the path to get here was kind of unusual. And so I got my undergrad degree in biology at UC Santa Barbara, and at that point, I was more interested in playing beach volleyball. And then I ended up deciding to I was interested in plants, and I was interested in agriculture, and I became a plant breeder. I got my PhD in genetics at UC Davis. But then at that point, the field was transitioning to lab work. And I did one too many gels, and I decided I got to go out. I love backpacking, I love hiking and the forest. And so I retrained myself as an ecologist, as a postdoc. And I taught field and laboratory methods in ecology at UC Davis. And then I just kind of stumbled into an opportunity to manage a prescribed fire research program in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Park. Well, I should mention that I got a little touch of fire as a postdoc. I was working in a grassland ecology lab, and some guy from TNC stuck a drip torch in my hand one day, doing a grassland burning. A guy named Robin Wills, yeah, that kind of got me as like, wow, that's pretty cool. But then I got this job managing a prescribed fire research program and didn't really have a whole lot of background in prescribed fire or fire at all. So the key for me was I really quickly, I took a S130, S190, and I started going on fires, and I started observing, and it just, I'd say that's really been the key for latecomers to fire like me, is just immersing yourself in fire and learning it that way, not out of the books, but then you can take what you've learned in the classroom and bring it together with all of your observations in the field. And if you're interested in applied fire science, I think that's one suggestion I would have. So I'll leave it there.
Fantastic. Excellent, Eric. Laurel, you are up.
So I'm definitely representing is it the back of the parade, Steve, right? So I think I'm definitely still at the back of the parade, but so take that for whatever you will. And I guess if we're talking about career paths as shapes, mine would be a magnet, whatever, U shape, whatever. Because I was very sure that I was not going to do natural resources. My parents are both foresters. They met in forestry school at Virginia Tech. They went on wildfire details together. We would go hiking as a kid, and they would stop us and say, all right, it's dendro quiz time. What's this guy? And I was definitely not going to do natural resources. I went to the University of Maryland because my father is an extension forester, or he's about to retire from being an extension forester. And at the time, I got free tuition because that was a benefit that they gave in better budget days. And I decided I was going to do policy stuff, got a policy degree and like American cultural history studies. And I worked in DC for a year and was like, absolutely not, this is a terrible plan. And moved to Wyoming a couple weeks later, quit my job and just worked seasonal gigs for a while and ended up transitioning into working for the parks, the National Park Service on seasonal jobs, and decided that actually, I guess I'll do natural resources after all. So I got my master's in forestry at NC State and worked out in the mountains of North Carolina for a little bit before I got where I am now. I work in NC State Extension Forestry. I'm grant funded, so the things that I do take a lot of explaining, so it's not really like a firm position like Forest Service researcher. But half of my time I help coordinate outreach for the Southern Fire Exchange, so doing science communication for practitioners and making sure that they understand what the latest science says and that the researchers and the institutions are understanding, what folks on the ground are facing. And I also work on some other grant-funded prescribed fire projects that kind of center around outreach and education for private landowners. So I do a little bit of everything. We do a little research sometimes, depending on the needs of our funders. We do a lot of writing publications, hosting workshops. We burn with the NC State crew. I don't know if any of y'all are on here, but hey, if you are. And the other partners who burn around Raleigh, and just kind of whatever ends up coming down the pipe. I don't know that I have a lot of like sage words of wisdom, but I will put in a huge plug for getting some humanities education. I know that forestry degrees are pretty set. You have classes you have to take, may not have a lot of free time, but I do feel very strongly that, the way that I have taken to where I am was pretty winding, but I think it's been hugely helpful. And I think a lot of the issues that we face in land management and forestry and fire are less sometimes about the technical science and more about how do we think about how the science applies to humans and who are the people making decisions and why are they making those decisions. And taking some humanities classes, I think, is super helpful for thinking through those questions and incorporating that into your career as you move through. And I guess I'll add one other thing too, that, a lot of folks have said, say yes to things, and you should absolutely do that. And it can also be a lot harder to say yes if you are not the sort of person that you see in the room. It can be a lot harder to believe that you are someone who can say yes. And I was someone who was raised in a very particular religious environment too, about the things that women could and could not do and were not capable of. So just like extra encouragement that if you are someone who is not sure that you are the sort of person who can do that thing that pushes you a little bit, to give yourself the extra boost and do it, because it usually is going to work out and you can do it.
Thank you very much, Laurel. Those are awesome words, and you are at the head of the parade now. That's so awesome. And so a couple of points, Laurel, to your point about humanities and mixed. We saw in the plenary session, someone was talking about fire from an epidemiology standpoint. Today, I got an email from one of my recent students, because we did an S131 and we did this sand tables, and he's like, Dungeons and Dragons people have all these, game tables that are online. I'm like, what? That's awesome. We could do this. And so what's cool about fire from everyone's backgrounds, now we're talking about jobs. Are you a good mechanic? We need you. Are you a good cartographer? We need you. Are you good with money? We need you. So all these things play into that. And I see your hand, Steve. And one more quick thing to Steve's point about employees doing lots of different things. I will tell you that in the Nature Conservancy, when we would hire people that were kind of fresh out of their college career, we looked, if you were hired as an invasive tech, if you were hired for a lot of jobs, you were also expected to work on the fire line, because we just don't have enough people to do it. We don't have enough specialists. And so from a practical standpoint, I always recommend, if you're in any kind of fire environment or it touches it, take S130, 190, take, if you can, S212, which is the chainsaw class. There are some basic classes that if you take those from just a getting hired standpoint, your resume goes right on top, because if you can come into these positions ready to help us on a fire, where I came from at Disney Wilderness Preserve, again, some of our outreach people, fire wasn't their main job, but when the conditions were right, you were on the fire, and it was phenomenal. We were able to get things done. So just from that standpoint, I would recommend doing that. Steve, what you have your hand raised.
Yeah, two things. One, I want to answer George Jensen's question that was in the chat about having 1 foot in research and 1 foot in management. Until we know everything about fire, each of us is sort of in management and research simultaneously. I saw this slide earlier in the week, and it was a Herb Stoddard quote that says, "Land management is art that builds on history and is based on science." And so that art part, we continue to refine, you continue to practice and get better at it. But you need to be having that 1 foot in the science to sort of understand the roots and the building blocks. And so I just love that art. And I remember sitting in silviculture class, Jim Johnston said, silviculture is the art and science of growing trees. And I loved that concept, and I hang on to it. So yeah, George, I think we all are that way. And I remember Lepidopterus, a guy who specialized in butterflies, got his PhD in butterflies, telling me about Bartram's ixia because he saw it. And he was very concerned about it being needing to be protected because we didn't have very many of them, but he also assured me it was fire dependent. And so his concept was protect them from the fire. My concept was to go in and tinker around with it. And I was blessed to have Matt Corby on the staff at the time. And what Corby studied and did was he realized that you could trigger the Bartram's ixia to blossom by burning it in the growing season, observing it and documenting it. So he was about to do this big tour for botanists who were going to come out. And he had learned that it flowers 52 days after you burn it. And so he burned it 52 days before they were coming. And he missed it by 2 days. That year it was 54 days. But it's that kind of knowledge experimentation that's really, really important, I think. Anyway, I answered that one, Zach.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Does anyone else have any additional comments? Because what George asks, 1 foot in research, 1 in management. Any of our panel have any other comments on that? I will tell you, it's tough to take, if you are in charge of a controlled burn and you have someone that is really, really, they know the research on a certain species, often there is a conflict with what the researcher wants you to do. Scrub jays are a great example in Florida, who are perhaps one of the most crazily anal retentive birds. Everything's just got to be just so. But if you, and of course they depend on fire. And so many fire managers are tasked with burning next to a highway or a hospital or whatever. And so to have things just right based on research is often, there is sometimes a conflict. But I think, and Steve, great point on Corby, it's, you don't let the perfection try to, or don't let perfection be the enemy of getting stuff done or trying and documenting. It's a process.
Rosie used to say that, don't let your perfect get in the way of my pretty good.
So the next, Adam makes a point about, given how many science and fire talented people tend to be introverts, the importance we're all attaching to strong networking skills, we do well to acknowledge the difficulty of reaching out for many people. It is a discomfort zone, as Steve mentioned, but it's worth it. This is totally out of left field, but I will recommend this. I have had great, I've learned a lot from taking improv classes, improv comedy classes. I would recommend, if they are in your area, those classes, it's not about being funny. It's about embracing fear and embracing failure. And it's awesome. And so I'd recommend that for any student who, because this applies to job interviews, it applies to getting out of your comfort zone. So totally recommend that. Let's see. Anyone else have any thing to add on getting out of your comfort zone?
So Zach, along that line of being able to communicate and tell your elevator speech to the people you meet. We're working on some stuff here that, and we've got within the region, forests that have done this really well. They have shared their story. They have worked with their neighbors and their partners to the point where their land management effort has become what we're calling a cause. Everybody's behind it and pushing it in the same direction. There are other forests who haven't shared their story, and they're hanging their time up with objections to their management actions. And so I am not somebody who liked public speaking, but I have learned to speak publicly because I need to share our story so that we have the social license to do the kind of management we need to do. And so have your elevator speech ready.
And you know, to that point too, there are things you can do. You can take in your college. Someone just, I saw someone mention courses that have proved useful. I would say, you know, any kind of course that you can take that forces you to speak in front of your classmates, that forces you to give presentations. It is worth it to, you know, get out of that comfort zone and do those things. You know, give presentations to any group, volunteer to talk to maybe your local native plant society and they want to know stuff. Camille, and then I think Laurel.
So I guess I have maybe a couple answers to a few of the questions that were posed in the chat. To the point of, you know, how do you straddle both lines? I think, you know, this panel is a good representation of how you do it from either agency or either groups, right? Like I am housed at a university and could definitely like be in my ivory tower and not talk to anybody. But I think it's the choices that you make to not do that, right? And have those conversations with different groups, things like these conferences, as well as like local meetings about different related topics are always great to go to. And I think, you know, depending on where you are, the groups that you're involved in can vary a lot. And so, you know, I don't think that there is less value in engaging with a particular group over another, you know, and whether you really enjoy talking to high school students about being excited about fire, or you're talking to what kind of science is really interesting or needed given recent events with forest managers, all of those things I think have a place and value. In terms of networking and courses, I'll maybe echo Laurel's point that like some of my favorite classes I took in undergrad have nothing to do with forestry. You know, I took a class that was called Women Moving Women, about the modern dance movement, which was pretty incredible. And has nothing to do with anything I do now, but it's enjoyable. I have thought about doing the like dance your PhD, or encouraging all my students to do that. If you haven't checked those out, they're really cool. But I think it's just good to have like a variety of things that you do, that you learn, you know, because you never know when it comes into practice, right? And I think that's true for a lot of the science that we learn and do too. And I always encourage my students, when you're attending these kind of conferences, to always go to at least one talk that's like totally outside what you really know and what you're really interested in, because you might learn something that becomes, you know, your later career, or the really thing that motivates you into the future. And networking, I mean, in this like virtual world of being on Zoom, I think this is really hard. And I don't have like great advice on networking, other than I will say, I'm sure that this is echoed by many people here. I get way too many emails in any given day. So if you don't hear back from somebody, don't feel bad about emailing them again. I know it's like, you know, as an introverted person, it's really hard to like put that first step out there. And then when you don't get a response, you feel bad. But I would, you know, feel motivated enough to send that follow-up email, because I'll say that sometimes those emails fall through the cracks, but I get back to almost everybody who sends me a second email, because I'm like, oh no, how did I miss it? So I think it's good to always to follow up if you can't connect in person.
Thanks, Camille. Laurel.
Yeah, I was just going to say, well, a couple things. First, kind of on the networking piece, I think what everyone has said is really helpful advice. And also to sort of echo what I mentioned earlier is that, again, like that networking, fire is about relationships, and there's no way to avoid that. But that also makes it really hard if you are not the sort of person who mostly makes up the fire community. It becomes this self-reinforcing cycle because we are humans and we connect most to people who are like us. And so that, that can be hard if you aren't someone who is like everybody else. And I think that is changing. And I think everyone here and almost everyone that I know in fire is not someone who's intentionally excluding anybody or anything like that. But I think it is something to keep in mind, and it's okay to feel that way. And when you're thinking about like elevator speeches or public speaking or anything like that, we're all mostly outdoorsy folks, walking, hiking, biking, whatever your thing is. Do your speech or whatever you have to say while you're doing that sort of activity when you're already out of breath. And so then when you get nervous and you get out of breath, you'll be used to it and you'll be ready, and it really helps.
That's awesome advice right there. I always practice mine eating a whole thing of saltines, and it's great after that. So this is a good question. Advantages or disadvantages of a primary fire versus secondary fire career. Anybody want to handle that?
Well, this is Eric. I've seen it happen both ways. I think maybe when you're younger, it's easier to get more experiences in the fire world and then transition to research. But I approached it the other way.
Yeah, I think, and Steve, you may be able to speak to this since you're with the Forest Service, but I know advantages of a primary fire career, because when I used to work for the Nature Conservancy, we had staff that would go on to a fed job. So they join the Forest Service or Fish and Wildlife. And those agencies they have more of a structured fire career where here's where I'm going on this ladder. So I think an advantage of joining a fire agency is that you kind of know where you're going. I'll speak for when I used to work for the Nature Conservancy, 16 years, there's no ladder. In that organization, there's one person who's in charge of fire. And it's like none of us were going to get to that level. And then you have all these fire people who use fire managers who are biologists. One person raised bees. One of my best burners, he was a nursing major and he changed careers. And so there's no ladder to speak of if fire is your primary job. And so I think that's a great question, because I think it matters where you or who you work for.
So when I did my master's, Lita Kobzar was my advisor. Lita and Morgan and a couple of other folks wrote an article about 10 years ago, and Johnny Stowe and I made a presentation on it that talks about sort of this tripod of fire. You need experience, you need training, and you need education. And because so much of the training comes from the work experience, and you need to get a qualification on the fire line in order to get to that next level of training, or taking the PhD route requires a very huge time commitment that might prevent you from getting some of those middle level fire experience jobs. It is difficult to have all three legs of that tripod be strong. And so I don't know that I know the answer to this. What I can tell you is it is important to make each of those legs, experience, training, and education, as strong as you can, and it will take a commitment and a focus from you to try and do that. Though I've worked fire and I was primary fire for a while with the Florida Division of Forestry, I am not encumbered by mandatory retirement. So I think I'm the oldest one on my staff right now, because I didn't come up through fire, so I don't have to leave at 57. or he didn't have to leave them past that. And so those are some interesting nuances, but I really think it is important to understand the balance between the education, training, and experience, and try and have that fit your need.
And a lot of that depends on where you are. Panel, here's a neat question. I know we touched on how difficult it can be to predict the future of our careers, but from everyone's perspective, what future needs are arising in fire and what new challenges should today's students be thinking about? I mean, we could say climate change, carbon cycling, but from your opinions, what do the students of the future fire world need to think about?
I think related to the climate change piece and related to the human dimensions and how we as society do things piece is just kind of our fundamental relationship to nature. We're still in this very like, there's the trees and here's the suburban houses. And the reality is that there's probably not enough quarter-acre lots for everybody as our populations keep growing. And so what does that look like? And what does that mean for fire? And how are fire folks a part of those like policy and local zoning conversations? And how do we do fire and also be part of this conversation of just like fundamentally rethinking the way that we do our society? Because I think we have to.
Anybody else have any thoughts about what you think the future would hold? Adam?
Yeah, I addressed this in a comment in the chat, but I think I probably want to expand it just a little bit and first of all say I'm gonna mention this from my perspective as a researcher. Now, if you are a fire practitioner, there's always going to need to be using a certain set of tools, learning, of course. But let me focus just on what I know best, my background as a researcher. So when I was doing my master's work, it was kind of in vogue and there was a fascination with this new thing called geographic information systems. And so you had kind of a whole flavor of people who were doing their master's theses on what we would now refer to as walking around an area with a GPS and coloring it in a chloropleth map. You know, it just took a couple of years for the private sector to make that totally obsolete and easy to do using a few mouse clicks. A couple of weeks ago, I was telling a new graduate student who was really interested in learning how to fly unmanned aircraft about how many years and hundreds of hours I spent learning to become a really good pilot. And then I showed him how to fly, and it took him about 5 minutes to attain about the same level of skill that I spent years to gain. So be cautious when it comes to a particular technology. It's always really good to have kind of a toolbox of approaches that are, you know, help you to answer that question. But I think more important is understanding how to ask and answer those questions, that process of thinking about things. And also, like we've been kind of talking a lot about, is communicating with people and connecting across people so that you can talk to someone and say to someone, let's say if I'm in the research world, if I talk to one of my colleagues who's in management, saying, what kind of needs do you have? What are your, you know, what are your concerns here? And then I use kind of my special research toolbox to say, okay, I've got a thing for you, or I've got a way to answer your question and I can be helpful. And that's where the fertile areas are. So I'd say, you know, maybe kind of some mix is a recipe for success, like I say.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. And we've just got a few minutes left. I see, George, we will get to your question real quick. 2 quick points about networking. Steve Miller, prescribed fire councils, local birding, plant societies, pretty much, you know, in your local SAFE chapters, there's almost an overwhelming amount of opportunities, but do local. Go to your local state park, go to your local forest preserve, volunteer. That's something that's strategic as well for your resume. Do a lot of things, because you don't know what thing you have done as a volunteer that might get you noticed in a job interview, not necessarily fire. And I think that's it for the questions up front. And so in our last 5 minutes, George has asked your best memory, learning moment or otherwise of your career. So Adam.
I'm gonna have to think about that. Come back to me.
Zach, you were muted.
Steve, you're up.
So Mary Huffman, who works for the Nature Conservancy, and she's the coordinator for Indigenous use of fire, asked me to set up a tour, a kayak trip for a bunch of folks from various Native American tribes who were in Jacksonville to talk about fire. So I planned this tour. We got out halfway through. We hiked out onto the property. We were on a sand hill. I was talking about all the great things fire does. And I managed to say kill oaks with fire about 20 times in about 10 minutes before I had the sense to ask, what do they do with fire? And in California, they're using fire to encourage oaks for baskets. So I guess the memory is know your audience.
That's a good one. I'll do real quick mine. When I was in Brevard County, the brand new fire manager of the EEL program, we did this incredibly challenging coastal scrub fire on the barrier islands. I had the Merritt Island people. I had a flamethrower. It was amazing. We were doing great fire behavior, everything blowing off of the Atlantic Ocean. A school bus drives by filled with kids. And as they drive by, it was at that point when the Merritt Island crew with their flamethrowers ignited all of the scrub so it would go in a head fire. The school bus was reflected orange as their faces, in horror as they drive by. So I learned, close the roads down when you're doing ignition. To this day, I remember that, all their faces going, okay, I'm done. So, but that was my good learning moment. Laurel.
This doesn't really have anything to do with fire, except that I was talking about fire when I went. But when I had first started this job, the first year I had this job, there is an international working group that our extension group is really involved with, and they had a meeting in New Zealand. So NC State paid for me to go to New Zealand and hear folks there talk about all of the cool stuff that they do, including wildfire management. So it is related. And so I'm going to say that one.
That's excellent. Camille.
So I think the one that I talk about the most often probably was on a fire on the Plumas National Forest. We were, I think, 14 days into like the 21 days that we ended up being on that fire, and everyone was tired and we were sleeping on the ground, and typical 16-hour shift. And my day started out pretty awful with someone on my crew telling me that women were the root of all evil. But I think everyone else on the crew was like, no, what are you talking about? Absolutely not, which was really great because I was the only woman in the buggy when that happened. And so we had a great conversation about it. I was also very sick, had gotten a cold and was just like sitting there with my head on my chainsaw, holding the line as like my nose dripped on the ground. But it was the best backburn operation I'd ever seen. And, I have the most amazing picture of half of our crew, possible with just a wall of flames behind us. And we had a really fun time after, having properly built that line for the previous 13 days and got to burn it off, which was really a really enjoyable evening after a rough start to the day.
Nice. And then Eric?
Yeah, I had to think about that for a little bit, but I would say probably I've had the opportunity being in the Forest Service of having a few helicopter rides, which gave me a different perspective of forest management. We get so used to stuff on the ground, and just being able to see stuff, my landscape from a different perspective, man, it was eye-opening.
That, Eric, you just summed up everything in that one sentence. All of us have had different perspectives, and so we would recommend to the students to change your perspective because fire is just there. But if you experience it or view it through these different lenses, you're going to be a richer person and your career will benefit of that. And so I want to thank the whole panel. Adam had to drop off. And everyone here I know would welcome emails, whatever. If people have other questions, definitely contact us all. We are a part of the community, and we want you all to one day take our place doing this very same thing and answering those very same questions. So with that, again, thank you very much, esteemed panel, and go enjoy the night and go see more sessions tomorrow.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Noah, for putting together such a great panel. We want to encourage everyone to be sure to visit our exhibitor booths to connect with our Congress sponsors and partners. Simply click exhibitor tab in the navigation bar. And as a reminder, we do have a passport contest. You can earn stamps by visiting exhibitor booths and liking, commenting, or participating in deals and offers. Attendees with the most stamps will be entered into a drawing to win a free Fire Congress registration for 2023. This concludes the second day of the Congress. We look forward to continuing learning and connecting with you all tomorrow. Thank you and have a great evening.
Thanks, Noah. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, everybody.